Imagine opening a forgotten 19th century newspaper and reading a strange headline: Enormous human skeletons discovered during excavations in distant lands. Bodies far larger than any known human remains. Now imagine searching for those discoveries today, only to find that almost everything about them seems to have vanished. No museum displays, no clear scientific records, just scattered reports buried in old archives. Were giants really found in the lands once called Tartary? Or were these stories simply exaggerated echoes from a time when the world was still full of unexplored mysteries? Tonight, we examine the forgotten reports, the maps, and the strange historical clues behind one of the most intriguing questions in alternative history: the alleged discovery of giants in Tartary, and why the evidence appears to have disappeared. During the 19th century, the world was experiencing an extraordinary wave of exploration and discovery. Archaeology was rapidly developing. Explorers were traveling into remote territories, and newspapers eagerly reported every new find that hinted at lost civilizations or ancient secrets. It was an era when history seemed to expand almost weekly as new ruins, tombs, and artifacts were uncovered. In this climate of curiosity and speculation, unusual reports began to appear in newspapers and local scientific bulletins describing something far more sensational than pottery or ancient tools: enormous human skeletons. These reports appeared in various regions, sometimes in rural excavation sites, sometimes during the construction of railroads, canals, or farms. Workers digging through ancient burial mounds occasionally claimed to uncover bones that appeared far too large to belong to ordinary humans. Some articles described skeletons that suggested heights of 10 or even 12 feet. Others mentioned skulls that were unusually large or oddly shaped. The details varied, but the central claim remained the same: human giants had once walked the earth. At the time, many readers did not immediately dismiss such stories. In fact, the idea of ancient giants already existed in folklore and historical traditions around the world. From biblical narratives about the Nephilim to legends preserved in European, Asian, and Middle Eastern cultures, stories of unusually large human beings had circulated for centuries. For some people, these archaeological discoveries appeared to confirm that those ancient traditions might contain fragments of historical truth. One detail that continues to intrigue modern researchers is the geographic pattern behind several of these stories. A surprising number of the reports emerged from regions historically connected to territories that older European maps labeled as Tartary. For centuries, the word Tartary appeared across enormous portions of Eurasia on Western maps. It stretched from Siberia across Central Asia and sometimes even touched the borders of China. To early European cartographers, Tartary represented a vast and mysterious frontier. It was not necessarily a clearly defined empire, but rather a broad geographic label applied to lands inhabited by various nomadic cultures, tribes, and kingdoms that were largely unfamiliar to Western scholars. The size of the territory alone gave it an almost mythical aura. On some maps, the word Tartary covered nearly half of Asia. Because these lands were so distant and poorly understood in Europe, many stories about them took on an air of mystery. Travelers, missionaries, and merchants often returned with tales that blurred the line between observation and legend. By the 1800s, when newspapers began printing reports about giant skeletons discovered in remote areas, some readers connected these discoveries to the enigmatic lands once labeled as Tartary. The reports themselves varied widely. In certain cases, newspapers described farmers digging into ancient burial mounds and uncovering massive bones. In other stories, railroad workers blasting through hills claimed to expose tombs containing unusually large skeletons. Some articles even stated that these remains had been sent to universities or scientific institutions for further study. Yet when modern researchers attempt to track these discoveries through official archives, the trail often grows cold. Museum records rarely mention giant human skeletons from those excavations. Scientific publications from the period seldom provide detailed measurements or preserved specimens that would confirm such extraordinary claims. The objects themselves, if they ever existed, seem to have vanished. This disappearance has fueled a long-standing mystery. Where did those bones go? One explanation is that many of these reports were exaggerated or misunderstood from the very beginning. Newspapers in the 19th century often prioritized sensational stories that captured the public imagination. A discovery that seemed unusual in the field might grow larger with each retelling as journalists attempted to attract readers. A skeleton that was slightly above average height could quickly become a giant once the story passed through several layers of reporting. Another possibility is that some of these bones were misidentified. In regions like Siberia and Central Asia, large prehistoric animals such as mammoths and ancient bison were frequently uncovered during excavations. Without the specialized training of modern paleontology, workers might easily confuse these remains with those of gigantic humans. A massive femur or oversized rib bone could appear strangely human to someone unfamiliar with fossil anatomy. However, the mystery deepens when we consider that stories of giant skeletons were not limited to one isolated region. Similar reports appeared across different continents throughout the 1800s and early 1900s. In North America, newspapers described giant skeletons discovered in burial mounds. In Europe, occasional reports mentioned oversized human remains found in ancient graves. These scattered stories formed a pattern that continues to fascinate researchers today. Some alternative historians argue that the repeated appearance of these reports suggests that something unusual may indeed have been discovered, something that later disappeared from official records. According to this theory, powerful institutions may have collected and quietly removed the evidence, either because it challenged established scientific theories or because it conflicted with prevailing historical narratives. Whether or not such claims hold truth remains deeply debated. Mainstream historians and archaeologists point out that extraordinary discoveries require extraordinary evidence. Without preserved skeletons, verified measurements, or documented excavation records, it is extremely difficult to confirm the existence of ancient human giants. Yet the persistence of these stories keeps the question alive. Why did so many reports appear during that particular era? Why were giant skeletons such a recurring theme in newspapers of the time? And perhaps most intriguingly of all, why do so many of those reports end with the same curious detail? The remains were taken away for study and were never seen again. As we continue this investigation, the mystery surrounding the giants of Tartary becomes even more complex. Because the story is not only about bones discovered in the ground, it is also about maps, lost civilizations, cultural memory, and the strange ways in which history sometimes leaves behind shadows rather than clear answers. And as we dig deeper into those shadows, we begin to uncover a story that may reveal just as much about human curiosity as it does about the possibility of giants themselves. As the 19th century progressed, the fascination with giant skeletons only grew stronger. Newspapers across different countries occasionally printed reports describing strange discoveries made during excavations. Some of these articles were short notices buried in local sections. Others were written with dramatic language, suggesting that the discoveries could change everything historians believed about the ancient world. Many of these reports followed a similar pattern. Laborers digging foundations, farmers plowing fields, or construction crews building railroads would stumble upon burial sites. Inside those graves, according to the articles, were skeletons far larger than ordinary human remains. Some were described as wearing unusual ornaments or buried with tools that hinted at ancient cultures long forgotten. At the time, the public imagination was already primed to accept the possibility of ancient giants. Biblical texts, classical myths, and medieval chronicles all contained references to unusually tall or powerful human beings. The idea that the earth might once have been inhabited by people of enormous stature did not seem entirely impossible to readers living in the late 1800s. However, what makes the story more intriguing is how frequently these reports ended in the same mysterious way. The remains, according to the articles, were often collected and sent to institutions for study. Universities, museums, or scientific societies supposedly received the bones so that experts could examine them. Yet when modern researchers attempt to trace these collections, the results are often inconclusive. Records may show that artifacts were received from certain excavations, but the giant skeletons themselves rarely appear in official catalogs. In some cases, the entire collection seems to have disappeared from the historical record. This pattern has led some researchers to wonder whether the discoveries were quietly dismissed, misplaced, or intentionally ignored. Supporters of alternative historical theories suggest a far more dramatic explanation. They argue that the discovery of genuine human giants would challenge many established scientific ideas about human evolution and ancient civilizations. According to this view, institutions might have preferred to remove such evidence rather than confront the implications. But before jumping to that conclusion, historians urge caution. The late 19th century was also a time when scientific standards were still developing. Archaeology was not yet the rigorous discipline it is today. Many early excavations were poorly documented, and artifacts were sometimes lost, damaged, or incorrectly stored. Entire collections from that era have vanished simply because record-keeping was inconsistent. In addition, newspapers often relied on second-hand information. A reporter might hear about an unusual discovery from a local worker or traveler and publish the story before experts had verified the details. Over time, these stories could become exaggerated, transforming ordinary archaeological finds into sensational headlines about giants. Another factor worth considering is the way human perception works when encountering unfamiliar objects. A large bone fragment partially buried in soil might appear enormous when first uncovered. Without proper measurement or comparison, observers could easily misjudge its true size. Once the story spread through word of mouth and newspapers, the original details might become distorted. Despite these rational explanations, the mystery refuses to disappear entirely. When researchers examine old newspapers from the 1800s, they still find a surprising number of references to giant skeletons. Some reports describe skulls with unusual shapes. Others mention burial mounds containing multiple large bodies arranged in ceremonial positions. Even if many of these stories were exaggerated, the sheer number of them raises interesting questions. The connection to Tartary adds another layer of intrigue. For centuries, the lands once labeled under that name represented a frontier of limited knowledge for European observers. Vast territories across Siberia and Central Asia remained sparsely explored by Western scientists until relatively recently. This lack of information allowed myths and speculation to flourish. In those regions, local legends sometimes spoke of powerful ancestors, warrior tribes of unusual height, or ancient beings who once ruled the land. Such stories existed long before the rise of modern archaeology. While folklore cannot be treated as historical evidence, it often preserves fragments of cultural memory that inspire further investigation. At the same time, historians point out that human height has varied throughout history due to factors like nutrition, environment, and genetics. Certain ancient populations were indeed taller than average for their time. Discovering a skeleton that measured several inches taller than the surrounding remains might have seemed extraordinary to observers who were not accustomed to scientific measurement. There is also the possibility that some of these remains belong to individuals with medical conditions such as gigantism. Although rare, gigantism can cause people to grow far taller than the typical human height. If such individuals lived in ancient societies, their skeletons might stand out dramatically during excavations centuries later. Yet even these explanations do not fully resolve the fascination surrounding the giants of Tartary. The combination of ancient maps, mysterious territories, and vanishing archaeological reports creates a narrative that continues to capture the imagination of modern audiences. And perhaps the most intriguing aspect of this story is not whether giants truly existed, but why the idea continues to persist. Throughout history, humanity has been drawn to the possibility that the past was stranger and more extraordinary than we realize. The thought that forgotten civilizations or unknown peoples once walked the earth invites us to question the limits of our current knowledge. As we look deeper into the archives and examine the cultural context of these stories, we begin to see how easily myth, speculation, and genuine discovery can intertwine. The giants of Tartary may represent more than a literal mystery. They may also reflect the enduring human desire to uncover secrets buried beneath the surface of history. But the story does not end with old newspapers or forgotten excavation reports. Because in the modern era, the legend of the Tartarian giants has taken on a new life, spreading across books, documentaries, and digital communities that continue to search for answers hidden somewhere between fact and legend. In the end, the mystery surrounding the giants of Tartary sits somewhere between documented history, misinterpreted discoveries, and the powerful pull of human imagination. The 19th century was a time when the world was still revealing its secrets. Explorers were traveling into remote regions, archaeologists were opening ancient tombs, and entire chapters of human history were being uncovered for the first time. In such an environment, unusual discoveries could quickly turn into legends, and legends could easily blur into what people believed to be historical truth. What we do know is that the lands once labeled as Tartary covered immense territories stretching across Eurasia. These regions were home to many different cultures, tribes, and civilizations over thousands of years. Ancient burial traditions existed across the steppes, in mountain valleys, and in remote plains where archaeological exploration remains incomplete even today. It is entirely possible that many discoveries made during the early days of excavation were poorly documented, misunderstood, or simply lost, as collections were moved between institutions and records disappeared over time. But the repeated appearance of giant skeleton stories in old newspapers still raises an interesting question. Why did these reports appear so often during a specific period in history? Were they simply the result of exaggeration and misunderstanding? Or were they reflections of discoveries that people at the time did not fully understand? We also have to remember that scientific disciplines like archaeology and anthropology were still developing during that era. Standardized excavation methods, proper cataloging, and detailed measurement practices were not yet universally applied. Many early digs were conducted by local workers or amateur explorers who did not always record their findings in ways that modern researchers could later verify. Entire collections from the 1800s have disappeared simply because they were never properly archived. At the same time, human fascination with giants goes back much further than the 19th century. Nearly every major culture on Earth contains legends of unusually large humans. Ancient texts, mythologies, and oral traditions speak of powerful beings who were taller, stronger, and sometimes more advanced than ordinary people. Whether these stories were symbolic, exaggerated accounts of real individuals, or reflections of misunderstood discoveries, they became deeply rooted in cultural memory. The lands once called Tartary have their own share of such traditions. Across Central Asia and Siberia, folklore sometimes speaks of ancient warrior tribes or powerful ancestors whose stature and strength set them apart from ordinary people. While folklore alone cannot confirm the existence of giants, it shows that the idea of larger-than-life humans has existed in the cultural imagination for centuries. Another possibility often discussed by historians is that some of the skeletons reported in the past may have belonged to individuals with rare medical conditions such as gigantism. Although extremely uncommon, gigantism can produce people who grow significantly taller than the average human height. In ancient societies, individuals with such unusual physical traits could easily become the subjects of legends or myths that grow more dramatic over time. And yet the story of the giants of Tartary continues to capture attention today, not just because of bones or archaeological claims, but because it touches on a deeper human curiosity. It raises questions about how history is written, who records discoveries, and how easily information can be lost or transformed over time. When people see old reports that seem to vanish from modern records, it naturally sparks speculation about what might have been forgotten, dismissed, or overlooked. But perhaps the most important lesson in all of this is that history is rarely as simple as it first appears. The past is not a perfectly preserved record. It is a puzzle made of fragments, documents, artifacts, traditions, and interpretations that change as new evidence appears. Sometimes what looks like a mystery is simply the result of missing pieces. Other times, those missing pieces lead to entirely new discoveries. The giants of Tartary may ultimately turn out to be a mixture of myth, misunderstanding, and rare historical anomalies. Or perhaps they are reminders that vast regions of the ancient world remain less studied than we might assume. Even today, archaeologists continue to uncover surprising discoveries in places that were once thought to hold no secrets at all. What makes this mystery so compelling is not just the possibility that giants once existed, but the realization that our understanding of history is always evolving. Each generation revisits the past with new tools, new questions, and new perspectives. And sometimes those new perspectives allow us to see old stories in an entirely different light. So the question remains open. Were the giants of Tartary simply legends born from misinterpreted discoveries and sensational newspapers? Or do these scattered reports hint at something that has yet to be fully explained? For now, the evidence leaves us with more questions than answers. But perhaps that is exactly what keeps the mystery alive. If you enjoy exploring forgotten history, ancient mysteries, and the hidden stories buried in old maps, archives, and legends, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here we dive deep into the past to uncover the stories that history left behind, the ones that challenge what we think we know about our world. And remember, sometimes the most fascinating discoveries are not the ones already written in the pages of history, but the ones still waiting to be found.